The first speaker, Chris Bennett, again, the most renowned historian on the subject, I have his 3 books here. I've come to realize that even though I've read his first book a couple times, I haven't gotten to sign it yet, so I got to remember to do that. But I've studied Chris's work more than anybody else in this field, and having studied some history and being a lover of it myself, I just can't get enough of it. And I haven't gotten through his new book yet, Cannabis and the Soma Solution, but I have to soon, because I'm going to be printing a review of it in my newspaper in the next issue here. So I encourage you to learn as much as you can from Chris. He just has a way of speaking and presenting that's quite wonderful, and I invite him to every single convention that I possibly can. I think he's missed one out of all the years. So I'm so glad to have you here again, Chris, and come on up, buddy. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. You know, it's kind of ironic, but I got my first break as a cannabis activist here at UBC 20 years ago on CITR with the Dick Clark of the grunge generation, Nardwuar, the human serviette. So it's kind of swimming back upstream like a salmon to the old birthplace of Canadian cannabis activism, because there wasn't really any other BC activists really prominent at that time. And it's come a long way since then. You know, we've seen industrial hemp become a reality from people not even remembering what the word hemp was. You know, when I first heard it, I was like, hemp, what's hemp, you know? And now we can go to a Safeway and get hemp food products, and big department stores and get hemp clothes products. And so it's been a real big thing to accomplish for Canadians. Likewise with medical marijuana, you know, we were, I think, the first country to legalize medical marijuana since Prohibition, and the advances that have happened since that time in hemp medicines. I don't know if you people are aware of, you know, not just cannabis's properties for fighting the nausea of cancer, but also actually fighting cannabis tumors, and evidence of cannabis's effectiveness in combating brain cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer. You know, if you smoke cannabis and cigarettes, you have less of a chance of getting lung cancer than if you just smoke cigarettes. That's the latest study. And if you're doubtful of any of this, just do a little bit of searching around. We have Google nowadays, and you know, speaking of the logos and whatever you want to ask the logos, the answers are out there, and there's lots of information on this subject. Generally, when I get invited to these things, I get asked to speak about my 3 books: Green Gold, The Tree of Life, Marijuana and Magic and Religion, which came out in 1995; Sex, Drugs, Violence in the Bible, which came out in 2001; and the latest one, Cannabis and the Soma Solution, all of which deal with various aspects of the religious history and magical history of cannabis. I also have a shop, probably a few people in here have been into, called The Urban Shaman, and I sell plants like the plants for making ayahuasca, sacred cactuses, salvia divinorum, and stuff like that. And I also have a court case going on regarding the religious freedoms and the ability to be able to use cannabis according to the religious freedom laws of Canada that's taking place. And although I am a religious user, and I was advertised at this event as a reverend, I think that even from a human secularist perspective, when it comes to this plant and our relationship with it, you know, we're talking about anywhere from 10 to 25,000 years of human use, and that's a pretty heavy indigenous relationship. So even from a human perspective, you know, it doesn't matter what religious text you talk about. All those texts were written by the hand of man, but no matter what God you believe in, if you believe that God created the earth and created the plants of the earth, that God created cannabis. So right to cannabis is a no-brainer from any perspective, as it is all plants, you know. Evidence of archeological evidence of cannabis goes back for fiber use about 10, 12,000 years from Taiwan, evidence of preserved hemp fibers. But based on tools for decording hemp from stalks, it's believed to go back 25,000 years and possibly even longer. And this puts cannabis and humanity's relationship right around the time of the Great Leap Forward, when humanity was coming up with concepts like the wheel, fire, things like this. And one of the top cannabinoid experts in the world, Dr. Guy from GW Pharmaceuticals, has written a paper speculating that cannabinoids may have played a facilitatory role in this time of the Great Leap Forward, causing man to think in new novel ways and approach problems in new novel ways, as well as aiding in things with like night vision through its lessening of oracular pressure. So it's pretty ancient. Evidence of smoking cannabis, like inhaling it, not really from pipes and stuff like that, goes back about 5,500 years in the Ukraine, actually, near the Russian steppes. And this occurs amongst the Seredeni Stog. The Seredeni Stog were the Proto-Indo-Europeans. Indo-European is the culture that, basically all of our many Western languages come from. French, English, German, Sanskrit in India, elements of Persian language. And this is the ancestor group, and they were also the first to, we have evidence of polypod bowls with burnt cannabis in them from caves from that period of time. And also, these people were the first to domesticate the horse. And the domestication of the horse is believed to have been enabled by the discovery of hemp ropes and stuff used to corral them and wind them up. And through this high mobility, these people not only spread language throughout the world, but the use of cannabis and the linguistics for cannabis, and can be seen in many of the modern words for cannabis. All of them are related through the AN, such as chambra, bong, humph, all these different national names, all come from this ancient thing. And cannabis's role in religion, likely this early use was religious use. We also have evidence of from Gavrinis, France, from a mound there from Goat Island of cannabis being burnt there about 4,000 years ago as well. So, and then in Afghanistan, in the Bactria Margiana region, in the last couple of decades, they've discovered a temple that's 4,500 years old, and it's about the size of a football field. And half of that temple was dedicated to making a sacred beverage, believed to be the Heoma, which was the source of the Zoroastrian religion and later the Vedic religion in India, that contained both cannabis and ephedra. They found fossilized cannabis seeds and evidence of cannabis resins in the grinds and the bowls and stuff there. Likewise, another major archaeological discovery of cannabis comes from China recently, where they found 2,700-year-old evidence of cannabis, female cannabis, high-quality THC-producing cannabis that was cultivated for intoxicating purposes. We're not talking about fibrous hemp, so probably by the time of this discovery, they'd already been doing some hybridizing for THC content for millennia or centuries even. And this was found amongst the Caucasian group right in the middle of China. And it's likely they picked up the Chinese name for cannabis, huma, and brought it down to this other region where we have the sacred beverage known as heoma. In China, the use of cannabis is equally much more ancient than this, though. It's believed that around 2000 BC, Shen Nung wrote the first pharmacopoeia, and it prescribed cannabis for a number of medical applications that are identical with ones we're using it for today. And Chinese Taoists also use cannabis for astral traveling and stuff. There's a beautiful quatrain from about 2500 BC. It goes, first a yin, then a yang. No one knows what I do. Jade buds of holy hemp for the one that lives apart. And it's kind of like you have your ups and downs in life, but with cannabis, as steady as she goes. And we have also really ancient evidence of cannabis medicines and sacramental use from Assyria, Babylonia, these places as well. In the oldest cuneiform library, that of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, there's recipes for hashish medicines as well. There's use of it indicated for epilepsy, skin diseases, a variety of ailments, and as well there's a reference where it's talked about being mixed with wolfbane and oils and placed on the body so that it might open up one's ear to God. And likewise, in references to the sacred rites, the items for the sacred rites from according to Assyrian texts were honey, odorous plants, and cannabis. Now this is really important because one of the more controversial things that I've gained a bit of a reputation for are pointing to these references to cannabis that occur in the Bible. This didn't originate with me. In the 1930s, an etymologist and anthropologist from Poland, Bennett, started discussing these Hebrew words, cannabosum and canna, which she said were references to cannabis that appeared in the Bible in 5 different places. And this term canna is another evidence of this Indo-European word making its way into the Hebrew language through the trade routes, the spice trail, which is much of a hempen road as a spice trail in the ancient world. Cannabis was a major item of trade between these cultures. And I believe that these biblical, like there's other references I'll go into later regarding India and Persia and stuff, but these biblical references for us in the West, I think are really of profound importance. I really think the root of prohibition in the West is basically Christians versus the devil's weed. And people like Stephen Harper, who's a heavy evangelicist, and his church is directly against marijuana. I mean, specifically have an agenda against marijuana. That includes medical marijuana, and I think that's probably a large reason behind the massive waits for medical applications and whatnot, licensing and whatnot that's taking place in Canada, and patients getting arrested because their licenses are expiring. It's like they're throwing every block up they can to stall the process. And just as Darwin's theory of evolution was a huge threat to the whole biblical belief in creation and stuff, and caused a huge controversy, I believe these cannabis references, when you really take a look at them in the context of the biblical storyline, offer a similar threat, but to the very origins of these religions themselves. If you take a look at the first of these references discussed by Sula Bennett, and it occurs in Exodus 30:23, and God, who appears in flames of fire from within a burning bush, commands Moses to make this holy anointing oil with about 6 to 9 pounds of this cannabosum mixed with myrrh and cinnamon. And according to Mark Boyer over here, myrrh has some DMSO qualities, which helps transfer stuff through to the skin into the body. And your body is the biggest organ, and your skin has actual cannabinoid receptors in it. And then he would also take some of this oil, and he would go into the tent of the meeting, and he would place it on the altar of incense. Oils helped the incense burn. They had very primitive incense in those times. And he actually spoke to the Lord in the pillar of smoke over the altar of the incense, according to the story. In Hebrew, the pillar of smoke is actually referred to as the Shekinah, and represents the physical presence of God in the temple. So when you take this reference to cannabis, and you put it in the temple there with Moses in the tent of the meeting, he becomes like a shaman, who in other cultures still taking place in the world today, in South America and in Africa, ingest psychoactive plants like ayahuasca or iboga, and they interpret evolutionary leap into higher thinking and experience thought in a similar way to schizophrenics experience it as a voice coming outside of themselves. And this could be induced artificially through times of stress, through starving yourself perhaps, or through the use of certain psychoactive substances. And this is hugely fundamental in understanding the origins of religion, and why all of a sudden at a certain point in history humanity starts to hear the voice in the head, and religions start to take place, and even this has even left elements in language. Genius comes from the same root as genie and basically means guardian angel. Enthusiasm has elements regarding possession, and so it was almost thought these thoughts came into you from outside and stuff. And so something like cannabis, with its receptor sites in the areas of higher thinking and memory, has huge potential for this type of theory and its implications. Later on, in Judaism, when I first read these 5 references, I noticed that they contradicted each other. The first few were kind of positive, but later on it becomes kind of prohibited and rejected. And this has to do with the birth of religion taking place in a shamanic context, and then eventually rules and regulations take over. It becomes a means of control and power, and there's less interest on the shamanic revelations of stoned out prophets and whatnot. So that's part of the implication of that, and this follows through. This holy anointing oil played a huge role in the first few centuries AD of Christianity. I don't know how much you know about early Christianity, but what we know is, as Christianity today didn't really take root till about 350 AD after the Council of Nicaea. Prior to that, there were all sorts of Christian sects, now many of them known to us under the collective name of the Gnostics. And one of the main points of contention between these groups and the group that put together the New Testament out of scores of other texts was the use of this holy anointing oil for healing and enlightenment, and as well as incenses, as opposed to water baptism, which these other groups saw as a placebo type of thing. That, according to their own text, they say they go down in water and come up without nothing, but we're anointed and we feel the fire of God. So hugely important then as well. Further evidence can be found in the Zoroastrian religion of Persia, which plays a major role of influence on Judaism and Christianity, particularly in concepts like heaven and hell, the end of the world, the coming of Messiah. December 25th comes from the Persian savior's Mithras birthday and wasn't adopted by Christianity until well into the 3rd century. It came through the Romans, but originates with the Persians. The Zoroastrians, we know that they were cannabis users because they left actual references in some of the texts. And the original people that came up with the concepts of heaven and hell did so after ingesting super strong preparations of cannabis laid into wine. So powerful, in fact, it would knock them out for a couple of days at a time. Ardu Viraf and Vishtaspa record their journey over the heavenly bridge into the other world. And it's really fascinating stuff to take a look at. Likewise in India, Shiva, the oldest worshipped god in the world, whose worship goes back to the Stone Age, is the Lord of Cannabis. He's perpetually stoned up in the Himalayas, sitting in his cave and preparing bhang, the sacred beverage of India. Likewise, Kali, his sometimes consort, is equally involved with cannabis, particularly in regards to tantric rites involving sexual rites, where cannabis plays a prominent role. And these are also believed to go back to the Stone Age. Cannabis is still consumed ritually in a variety of festivals in India, such as the Holi Festival, the Festival of Colors, where whole families drink bhang together and throw paint on each other. Shiva Ratri, it'd be pretty hard to miss without the smell of the chillums, and the Kumbh Mela held every few years in India in 4 different spots, is basically the story of cannabis's creations. Due to an insult to the chief of the gods, Indra, laid upon Shiva, Shiva put a curse on Indra, and apparently this started draining the power of the 3rd world where all the gods lived. And so the gods gathered up together and they approached Vishnu and said, what are we going to do? And Vishnu says, take sacred herbs and put them in the ocean of milk and then churn it, and you will get the Amrita and it will restore your life. As the story goes, they do this and they get a huge serpent and tie it around a mountain for a churning stick and throw the potent herbs in the ocean of milks, and they produce the sacred Amrita and restore the heavenly powers. And wherever a drop of the Amrita fell on earth, it said that cannabis sprung. And this is one of the areas where they hold the Kumbh Mela, which is the holy pot of Amrita. And the basic story of the turning of the ocean of milk is basically the earthly bhang ritual, where you put cannabis into milk and grind it and produce the sacred drink bhang, taken to the heavenly level. So it's a fantastic tale, and it's the oldest and hugest human gathering on earth. You could go there and you'll just witness naked sadhus with big dreadlocks and stuff like that, smoking chillum after chillum of cannabis, or drinking preparations of bhang. In the Sikh religion as well, there's a group, the Nihang Sikhs, who are the ancient temple guardians, and they ritually use cannabis as a sacred substance, sukadan, and they grind it with huge pestles that are about this tall and about this thick around in rituals, and they were notorious for keeping their freedom and their high mobility and nomadic lifestyle throughout the British Raj period. The British Raj period actually is a really fundamental thing for understanding claims of schizophrenia today. What happened during the British Raj, both in Islamic and Hindu areas, were that when the British Raj was taking over India, they were having a lot of rebellion amongst cannabis users, particularly sadhus and fakirs and groups like this, and it was hard for them to quell this because these figures were figures of religious importance to the area. They had a role in the local religions. It would have been really offensive to the people for them to just go out and start grabbing them up. They were always playing with a bit of tension and stuff. And so they came up with the idea of cannabis making you insane. And there's a whole book written about asylums in 19th century India where they would just go and pick these guys up right off the street. If you weren't working, you either went to a workhouse or you went into an insane asylum. And it was by putting this scientific term of insanity on the issue of cannabis that they were able to make it away from the religious thing and make it this moral issue in regards to that. And many people ended up dying in these horrific native-only asylums. And similarly, during huge times of huge deficits, Stephen Harper, the evangelicist, has hired an evangelical minister to do a hugely funded study on schizophrenia. And what could be more schizophrenic than the concept of unearthly deities giving you guidance or waiting for you in a fiery pit below? And so it's kind of ironic that not a scientist was given this role of this study of cannabis and schizophrenia, but an evangelicist with no scientific qualifications whatsoever. Typical of today. The evangelicals are particularly, our friend previously was speaking about hempology, and if you go down to, hempology, the Hemp Fest in Seattle, and if you go down to the Hemp Fest in Seattle, one of the things you'll notice there is a contingent of Christian protesters protesting the evils of cannabis and saying how all us pot smokers are going to go to hell. This is largely based on revelation references to sorcery, which comes from a Greek word, pharmakia, and this is the basis of our modern term pharmacy. And there's whole tractates written about medical marijuana, tying it in with these book of Revelation references to sorcery. And I've heard speeches by evangelicists, seen television evangelicists refer to it. And it's something I think that, as the Christian right really unites here in Canada, and that's what's really happened. There's a fantastic book out, The Armageddon Factor, The Rise of Christian Nationalism in Canada. And this is like hugely influencing Canadian politics and hugely influencing Canadian pop policy. I don't know how many of you know about Bill S-10, but this is a new bill that conservatives are pushing through. And this will make it so that you get like over a year in jail if you grow 5 plants of cannabis. You get over a year in jail if you make cannabis brownies. You get over a year in jail if you make hashish. And it's buried in this larger bill that has largely to do with gun violence and gangs and stuff like that. And that's how they kind of push their moral agenda through by, if you're against these things, then you're against crime. You're not, that's how they kind of sell it, although Canada's had its lowest crime rate in decades. And in order to, Stephen Harper himself said a few years ago, we've got to deal with Beatles-era drug culture and talking about the negative influence of Beatles-era drug culture. And ever since he said this, I've seen him singing John Lennon songs in his election ads. He's got a Beatle mug in his hand, and he's just trying to play cool. And you can't have it both ways, John Lennon, he said himself, like the best thing for Britain would be to legalize gay marriage and legalize marijuana. 2 things that Harper is directly opposed to, and all freedoms, And I think that people really got to start calling him on using the Beatles and John Lennon and people like that for his own totally unmoralistic agenda. I know for a fact what word John Lennon would have used to describe Stephen Harper, and it's not one I'm going to repeat here. But yeah, so huge stuff happening throughout history. We have a plant here that we have, like I say, 10 to 25, possibly longer years of human use, that it's played a role in the religions of Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Sikhism, Taoism, Buddhism, in the world's great religions. There's a historically identifiable role for cannabis, particularly around the time of their inceptions. And usually the pattern has been with cannabis, when you take a look at the cannabis history, of times of it coming out in open and being celebrated, and then patriarchal power freaks coming in and taking control of that and suppressing it down into oblivion, where we forget about it completely. Just like we forgot about industrial hemp and how we can make all our paper from hemp and how we can make all our clothes from hemp and how we can get the most nutritious seed in the world from hemp. In just a few short decades, they totally obliterated that from Western culture. People, I myself as a cannabis activist, I put together a cannabis museum. And I know all about the history of cannabis, but I started collecting these cannabis medicine bottles. And there was just scores of different bottles of cannabis medicines, everything from cough medicines to corn and bunion medicines to women cramps medicines, just so many different things that people are just rediscovering now. And in a few short decades, just like, you know, back in the 30s, they were available, widely available, hugely popular medicines, totally obliterated and totally forgot. The government will tell you now there's no scientific evidence for cannabis medicines. Well, we have decades, centuries, millennia of recorded use of cannabis medicines, so that's just a crock. Maybe I'll open the floor up to some questions if anybody has any questions. Or
I'm kind of confused where my question is going, but our generation's a little bit less influenced by religion, I would say. Some people would say, and it seems that most of your arguments are geared towards the religious history of cannabis. So for a generation that's a little less influenced by religion, what would you say could be more?
Oh, there's like huge stuff happening politically right now in Canada and the world. You know, I would say somebody your age, you can literally be looking at a real future in the cannabis industry, marijuana, medical marijuana, whatever you want to get into, because it's coming. It's already happening, you know. California just about legalized. Here in Canada, there's you can get involved with people like Dana Larson, who's here speaking. He's running for the head of the NDP. There's groups like TED's here, which you can find out about politically going on, and all sorts of. You can go to whyprohibition.ca, another Canadian group that's got stuff going on. There's just like, you know, my little interest in religious history stuff. That's like a little tiny fragment of the cannabis movement, and is really not representative of what's happening globally, internationally, nationally.
There's another question there.
I just have a question. If you're an MMAR, what are the laws around trading and or selling to each other?
Well, it's illegal, you know, like basically, yeah, you know, you'd have to have a license to provide cannabis, and how many of those have been granted? One or is it only one, or is that guy in Duncan producing medicine now too legally?
Well, in a way, yeah, that's more my field than Chris's. The licenses are very restrictive. You're only allowed to sell to 2 people legally when obtaining a designated grower's license. To tell you the truth, though, it isn't Chris's field, and I'm going to be sitting here at the back all day. None of the speakers today, well, John Conroy at the end knows the MMA art too well, but at the same time, I'm thinking this might be better suited for a direct conversation. The MMA art is a huge issue. Chris is more an expert on history, so if there's another history question for Chris, otherwise, thank you so much for coming out, buddy.